So, welcome everybody back to BRUBBLE, a podcast gathering young voices and perspectives from around and in and around the Brussels bubble. Today, we're playing around with a new format, a panel exploring and analyzing the top news stories of this month, September 2022. For those listening in via podcast, this will be on most major podcast platforms. Feel free to also check us out on YouTube, where we should have a live video, and vice versa. If you're on YouTube and only want to listen and don't want to see our beautiful faces, check out the podcast. But yeah, and leave a comment, leave a like, show us what you think of this format. So before we move into the first topic of discussion, because we're going to go rather broad here, really hit all the topics, I want to go around the table, introduce who we are, and I'm not going to forget myself, although I will do myself last out of, manners. So, Nikos, did I say that properly this time? Because I have to apologize. My pronunciation of names is quite despicable.
That's okay. We can fix that over the course of this podcast. So, hello to everyone. My name is Nikos Theodosiadis. I am 25 years old. I come from Greece, and I currently work at the European Commission in the Secretariat General, developing briefings for the President and the 8 Vice Presidents of the Commission. On top of that, I'm also working on the EU's first ever voluntary national review on the implementation of SDGs. And I also have some activities outside of the Commission. I am co-chair of the Policy Working Group for Economy and Trade at the European Democrat Students. It is the largest student organization in Europe. And the topics that I really push for wherever I go is getting young people involved in policy making, getting them involved in decision making, because I really think youth shouldn't play a role. What should play a role is how prepared and developed and nuanced your ideas are. But I always root for young people when they try to join politics and policy.
Yeah, no, great to hear. And I like the broader overview you bring, because this will be a broad episode, as I've said 2 times already. Joao, you're up next. Tell the kind people who you are.
Thank you very much. I'll try not to screw up after this bright presentation of my fellow Nikos, and greetings to my other fellow panelists, and also to the millions listening from home. And of course, thank you for this opportunity for being here. My name is Joao Pontes, I'm Portuguese, and I work as policy assistant in DG GROW, the European Commission. Currently, I deal with the Recovery and Resilience Facility and also the European Semester. This is my second time here in Brussels. I've been here in 2020 and 2021 while I was working for the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. I dealt with subjects such as internal market, industry, technical harmonization, tourism, better regulation, and so on. So I just hope for this to be a very fruitful discussion.
Yeah, no, it was funny too, because we ran into each other at a young professional, or what was it, Young Professionals in Foreign Policy event?
Yeah.
Where we instantly launched a passionate debate on energy security. And
yeah.
I'm glad he still tolerated my existence in the same room, because we tended to butt heads a few times. So we'll see when we get to that segment how we do.
That's what we want, right? It's why we are here.
Exactly, lock those horns, right?
Yeah.
Makes for good viewership.
Yeah.
Yes. Talking about locking horns, we'll move to the Frenchman in the room. Julien, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'll introduce myself too. I'm Julien, a political expert who's worked on campaigns across Europe and even starting to go global, having worked on Brexit, European parliamentary elections and French elections. And I work within the European Parliament ecosystem, providing support as a consultant and within the European Political Foundation. And on top of that, I'm a local representative for the party Renaissance from France, while being a geopolitical expert, an IR expert, and an expert on political linguistics and political behavior.
Sweet. That's a nice portfolio to bring. And it kind of reminds me that I myself, Simon Van Hoeve, am a bit of dark horse here, because I work for Microsoft, more government affairs related strategy planning, and I've been in Brussels for about a year, enough time to kick off a lovely podcast series called BRUBBLE, not BRUBBLE as some people call it, BRUBBLE. I just want to stress that. But yeah, so how have we been doing today? How's the weather treating you? How's the Brussels lifestyle? How's our weeks been?
So far, it's been good. I think we can all agree that today was one of the more pleasant days over the past month. The sun was shining, the sky was clear. It's a Friday. So we really can't complain. I think life is quite good in the bubble right now.
I suppose so. I mean, there's a nuclear threats over our heads, but life is quite good in the bubble. That's all we need to hear.
And winter is coming.
That's true. In more ways than one.
Yes, in more ways than one. So we
Yeah.
should get prepared for that, energy-wise.
But with winter
Blink.
coming, that means that September is ending. And that's what we're going to be looking at here today, really focusing a bit on what this month brought to us and what implications it'll leave throughout the months to come. And to do that, we're going to focus on a bunch of topics: energy security, Ukraine, the State of Union, the Italian elections, the right-wing shifts throughout Europe. So if you're interested in these, stick around and hear our professional or semi-professional opinions. Talking about myself here, not my esteemed guests. So we were talking beforehand, and we wanted to start by focusing a bit on Ukraine, which I think is the dominant issue within 2020 as a whole. And September as a month brought some interesting developments. We've seen the conversation really reignite following some Ukrainian counteroffensives, which were blissfully quite productive for them. Where do you think the Ukraine conflict is right now, and how do we see it, moving forward? What do we think the trajectory that we've seen throughout September?
I mean, it's going in a really complicated situation now, to the point that I think 3 or 4 hours ago, Ukraine officially applied for NATO membership. Not just saber-rattling, but officially applying, which now puts everybody in a very awkward position where NATO doesn't necessarily want to trigger the process because it could inadvertently drag NATO into a conflict with the Russian states. But on top of that, you've already got Vladimir Putin pushing every button he can and saying, with his speech today, that effectively we are at war with the West. We have to deal with the West as if they were our enemy as well, which is probably going to make the energy situation even worse for just about everybody, because it's also led to some very interesting attempts at sabotage with the Nord Stream pipelines, and is going to hit us all hard in several ways, including environmentally, if these sabotage attempts continue.
Yeah. And talking a bit about how we felt the Ukrainian situation throughout the month, you both, I don't expect you to draw from your European Commission experiences, but just observers in the bubble. How have you felt the situation progress throughout the month?
Joao, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start. It was a complete surprise for everyone in the world, actually, the counter-offensive and how it resulted in. Taking a huge chunk of the Kharkiv Oblast was no easy feat, especially controlling Izium, which is an important network for major hub supplies for the Russian army. So it was actually pretty good, well succeeded first phase of the counter-offensive. But and this will actually, for Putin, will actually have some short-term impacts, namely decrease on troop morale, increasing on partisan activity all throughout the Ukraine and the controlled areas, and also this can actually be a starting point to further convincing the West on that the West help is actually something that it can make a difference under the Ukrainian conflict. But nonetheless, we'll need to understand how this will play out, especially in terms of escalation.
Yeah, and escalation is quite one of the big fears that we're hearing thrown around here. And if you have any thoughts on the nuclear escalation, buzzword we hear, is it a buzzword? Should I actually be taking those, magnesium pills, iron pills?
Iodine.
Yeah. See, I haven't bought them yet, so.
Yeah.
It's always good to stock up on those pills, but I think number one, okay, before I begin anything, I would just like to express that I'm here to express my personal views and not anyone else's or any other organization that I may work for. That being said, first, we really owe a big, massive thanks to all Ukrainians, men, women, and children. They're giving us a lesson, and a historic lesson in resilience, in what it means to fight for your freedom, to fight for democracy, and to fight for their own self-determination. I think in Europe, sometimes we take those things for granted, and yet here we are in the 21st century, in 2022, and we have a war not in our back door, in our backyard, in our front yard. It's right next to us. It is something that just 1 year ago would have been surreal. But on the other side, we all as Europeans are responsible for not seeing the signs. I heard from a lot of my friends, Scandinavians in the Baltics, that said that we were telling you this for years. And the truth is, we as just ordinary Europeans did not listen. Perhaps we did not want to listen. Perhaps it did not suit us to listen. But here we are. Now, before we start moving on to the next phase of how we expect this war to go, I think we need to stop for a second and understand the leader that is responsible for this war, and that's Putin.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to understand that man, I think we need to go a little bit back, because the way that he doesn't play by the European rule book, he doesn't play by the Western rule book, and the truth is that neither should be, because Ukraine is beating him technically in his own game. We've seen a lot of developments in September. The sweeping advances that the Ukrainian military have made are definitely, to a very large extent, because of all the weaponry and support, lethal and non-lethal, that the West is providing to Ukraine. But at the same time, it's a personal victory for them on the ground, out of morale, out of determination, and out of tenacity. Because maybe Putin can try to mobilize 300,000, 500,000, 1 million, but the truth is that people in the opposing side don't really seem like they want to fight this war. And it's not just about mobilizing your army, but it's also about the logistics behind it, feeding it, transporting it, providing it fuel. So we're going to see a lot of developments. It's going to be a very important winter, no less, because of the situation with the energy crisis. And might I just add that not only did Ukraine submit its NATO application, it submitted an accelerated membership application. So really we're seeing Putin has done more for EU and Western integration, and especially on NATO, than we ourselves could have done in the past 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very inspiring on one hand, but also very traumatic that it got to this extent. And I think it's left all of us as Europeans wondering, are we actually even doing enough to support Ukraine in this conflict, in their struggle for their freedom against this oppressive force? And I think that was one of the major points that even the State of the Union dwelled upon, about, are we doing enough to support this? Are we, as a bloc, helping enough here? Do we think we are? And do we think this support will go up or down in the months to come? And do you think that the extension papers will have an effect on this?
So one of the big problems, and this is something that extends to what Nikos said, which is that we got very, and sorry if I just butchered your name.
Yeah, it's fine, it's perfect.
Nikos. But there's a big, we have a problem in the West, and this is something that a lot of us were dealing with when we were trying to point to the warning signs of almost 200,000 soldiers on the Ukrainian borders, that when a lot of us were yelling, Putin's about to invade, everybody kind of went, yeah, but there's not been a major invasion in 30 years in Europe. We don't need to worry, it's not going to happen. Putin's a geopolitical mastermind, which ended up being completely false because the guy's a clown on wheels. But what's happening now with the way that we're approaching the support system for Ukraine, and this is something that, from the French side at least, we've been struggling with quite often when it comes to our discussions on strategic autonomy that go back to the Sorbonne speech back in 2017, is that a lot of time when we talk about the need to get aggressive about military issues, the individual national cultures and not failings, but chips in the shoulder started showing. The Germans, for example, were always quite difficult to get involved in aggressive military endeavors, including when it comes to providing weaponry. You have countries that have had a history of authoritarianism who have also sometimes struggled to, or if they have struggled, to continue to struggle with the need to be more military aggressive. And also in the East, we have a lot of the states that were pushing aggressively for the need to fight against the Russian influence and against the Russian ability to attack Ukraine. There's also a slight issue there where they feel like they've not been listened to, it has caused some frictions in the process as well. And some of them are also, in the case of Viktor Orban, trying to shut down the whole system in general because it's inconvenient when it comes to energy prices back home with elections on the horizon, which makes everything even more complicated than it arguably already was.
Yeah, definitely. I think this leaves us a bit. Where will we be in October and November and December? I mean, looking forward a bit, and I know as I feel like we have international relations backgrounds, we are terrible at predictions. I always say that. But do we see this issue remaining the forefront, the leading issue, which I hope it will? Do you think it'll be the gripping issue by the end of October that it was in September? The driving force throughout the European debate?
Yeah, it will still maintain. It will still maintain the course, at least it's my opinion. Let me just be a little bit of a provocateur on something that Nikos just said, and I think like it's on the topic, which is even the president of the European Commission said that we did not listen. What was there? And I can ask broadly, did we not listen, or did we choose not to listen and not to see? Because the signs were there. Signs were there for a long time ago, since Georgia in 2008, 2014, so it has been a recurrent situation. And we just maintain the same posture of finding 21st century solutions, if you want, postmodern solutions to fight against a person that is pretty much a 19th century.
And ignoring the geopolitical reality in a lot of cases.
So in that scenario, yes, and that should actually make us think about what is happening inside of the European Union.
Yeah.
And this is a debate that concerns all of us. Going a little bit back to what Simon asked, where are we going to stand on October? I mean, winter was actually, I was trying to joke a little bit about the winter is coming thing, but there are some thought about this situation, which is if winter is coming, we know that we need to be prepared for this. With it, we are doing some stuff. The Commission is actually doing some stuff on that regard, and even the member states. But you need to do more, especially because when it starts to impact first the company, so first the industry, because we do not know what is going to be with the supply lines on gas, on energy, and also about people. And we have like a political calendar. We are going to have big countries like Spain that are going to have elections. Yep. So we do not know how this is going to play out and how the public support will actually come. I was hearing that in a few days ago, like even in, I think it was in Czech Republic, 80,000 people on the streets protesting against the war, against the situation, and actually being pretty much lean towards Putin. So this is a disturbing thing.
And we saw it in Italy too. A lot of Meloni's campaign was we don't need to, or she wasn't explicitly against supporting Ukraine, but there was a lot of talk about maybe this isn't our fight and maybe our people shouldn't be suffering for this. And Berlusconi himself was saying, oh, we're just trying to replace Zelensky with someone nicer, you know?
Yeah, I remember those words. I remember. Although in the case of Meloni, contrary, for instance, with the populists in Italy, she's actually pretty much keen on supporting Ukraine.
She's quite good on this.
Yeah.
And the sanctions.
The sanctions, yes.
She specifically mentioned that, but then that begs the question. You tried to be the devil's advocate.
Yeah. Thank you for noticing.
Yes. And
disclaimer.
Julien, you mentioned that Putin is a clown. I did mention, amongst the reasons that we didn't listen, is perhaps it didn't suit us to listen. Considering what's happening in Europe, in a lot of countries, like you just mentioned, in Czechia, with a lot of protests, there's a strong sentiment. As well in Bulgaria, there's and in other countries as well. People have, of course, every right to feel and to think what they want. That's what sets us apart from Russia, a country like Russia, where you can go 15 years in prison for having certain apps or posting things on Twitter. That is our strength, because I've had multiple times over the past month people tell me that they don't like that we take. It takes us so long to take decisions. That is our strength. Our strength is that we can sit here, we can debate in a podcast, we can go to our representatives in the European Parliament, in our national or local assemblies, and we can tell them that we agree or we disagree. Now, I'm just going to go on a small tangent.
Go for it.
Very small one, because we did agree that if the topic comes up, we would go on a side tangent. Now, we did not listen. And just, you also missed another example. And Chechnya in the early 2000s, Putin used the same playbook. And for Armenia and Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh, it was the same playbook. And it's the same playbook being used now, because there are people being killed in Armenia. And we are not talking about it. We are not talking about it. As a Greek, I am afraid that what is happening to Ukrainians and what Ukrainians have been called upon to do, maybe one day in the near future be called upon on Greeks. I really, really hope in the depths of my heart that I am wrong. But at the same time, I also feel like I owe it to my fellow European citizens. And I have a very strong European sentiment, and everyone that knows me, actually Joao can attest to that, he knows me quite well, knows that, and we are saying it again now. Listen, it's problematic for us to consistently make deals with people who do not abide by the same rules as we do. Now, there's a very famous quote by Putin, and one of the first political books that I read that got me in politics and in IR was, I may butcher her name, I do apologize, Anna Politkovskaya, which was a Russian journalist that wrote about Putin decades ago, because she understood his playbook, she understood the way that a former KGB agent operates, and unfortunately it cost her her life. It cost her her life because, well, if you want, Google it and read the Wikipedia article, but I'm not going to get into that. But one really famous quote that I've heard from Putin that has followed me through the entire war in Ukraine is, I remember him saying, when a fight is inevitable, make sure you strike first and make sure you strike hard. Now, this is exactly what Putin has been using all along. This is what he tried to do in Ukraine. Because I remind you, if, for instance, Zelensky, on the day of the invasion, took up the offer of a lot of European leaders to flee the country, flee to safety with his family, Ukraine would have fallen, because effectively it would be a massive country with a lot of strength, but without a leader. He stayed there, knowing full well it might cost him his life, to fight for what he believed. And I take you back to a similar situation, for instance, in Afghanistan, not so long ago, where there the opposite thing happened. As soon as the Taliban started making advances, the political leadership left and the country fell.
Yeah, and I mean, I think those are those are points we really have to digest, I think, because those are strong words. But what really stood out to me is that Putin's quote again, from striking first and striking hard. And as we're moving into October, we've already seen the end of this month. There is some alleged striking first happening on some of our pipelines. If that's the Russians, if that's somebody else, nobody's confirmed. But I think that really says that is our energy security the next thing that's going to be stricken at, if that's a proper English word?
It already has.
It already has, I agree.
It's,
absolutely.
Because let's be entirely honest, and this is why I'm going to have to disagree on something you said earlier about the Russia's ability, is that we learned that Russian corruption, which had already undermined the ability of the Russian military to actually just be active, sergeants selling away equipment on Russian eBay, stripping vehicles for metals to sell on the black market, this kind of stuff. We saw that outside of the possibility of a blitzkrieg in Ukraine, the Russian military faltered and started imploding, particularly when the European and Western aid started coming in and sanctions started biting. And this has put Putin in a desperate position where, one, he has to rely on his primary tool, which is the levers of energy, and effectively now putting an energy blockade around Europe as best as he can, despite the enormous cost to the oligarchs who underpin his regime. But on top of that is now even pushing him to, as his conscripts and extremely poorly trained conscripts are now going into the front lines, surrendering almost immediately in some cases, abandoning the fight or being pushed back quite heavily. He's now relying on more provocative measures, such as what may be the sabotage attempt on the pipeline. I mean, for example, one thing that happened, and this is something that I think is quite interesting that you kind of hinted at, is that Putin does do his best to provoke these situations. He spent months, well, years even, trying to provoke a reaction from the Ukrainians to break down ceasefires, to get them to attack Donbass more ferociously when he had the soldiers based around the country so that they would be easier to break through the defenses. But on top of that, this is why he's now making these threats of nuclear engagement, And this is why he is now saying, we've annexed these territories. If you keep pushing into them, we will retaliate as if you're attacking Russia. Now, touch back on your previous point on the nuclear threats. I don't think it's realistic. Because he's playing the levers, he's losing control, which is why I'm starting to use the term clown when I speak about Putin. And if anybody here doesn't follow it already, follow the Daft Putin Twitter account. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I second that.
But what we're seeing a state that's a leader who's losing control, whose situation is more and more precarious, where he had to bring his military back into order on the conscription issue. And on top of that, threatening to nuke a neighboring state, despite knowing that it has been said repeatedly, if Russia engages in a nuclear manner, the West will retaliate. In no uncertain circumstances, it has been said by the French, by the Americans, and it has been made a red line. And Putin doesn't want to push that because once he breaks that barrier, it can be considered, due to the fallout, almost a declaration of war officially against NATO, who would suffer from the fallout of a nuclear blast. Even a tactical nuclear weapon could impact Poland if it was simply used in the Donbass, for example.
Yeah. Joao, I saw you give Julien a stare during that conversation. Any thoughts on that?
No, it was just your impression, because they were speaking very well actually. No, I agree with Julien on that regard. I don't think that nuclear weapons were actually going to be employed, although there is always the situation of, we always think about nuclear weapons as strategic weapons like launching.
Yeah.
Usually people never think about or never approach the tactical way of that they can actually be employed.
Yeah,
so like not even like not launching a missile, but sometimes like using a small device that nowadays is actually pretty much possible to do that, and use it as a further way or a last step way for escalation, like giving the final blow, and maybe use it as a dissuasion.
No, of course. I mean,
because I don't think like if it is like a huge strike, of course it will provoke some kind of reaction, but if it is like a small one, I don't know. So this is something that should be considered
into question as well another variable that until now we haven't considered: China.
True. Yes.
So nuclear threats, whether or not they're realistic, should not be the question. Someone in possession and with an ability to order a nuclear strike is making a nuclear threat. That in and of itself should remit a very, very, very strong consideration. We cannot underestimate at this point in time anything. Just like we shouldn't have underestimated the fact that there were 200,000 troops in the border of Ukraine and Russia, and we did nothing. We as in the West, collective. Now, okay, primary weapon of Putin is not energy, it's fear. There's energy is merely instrumentalized. He's using fear. He's trying to strike, because that's his playbook. He's trying to strike fear in European people's hearts and the West, to try to push perhaps more governments, let's say, yes, that are a bit warmer to some of the aspects that he's advocating for, and so on and so forth. At the same time, we're seeing a Russia that is, out of pure necessity, being forced to move eastward to China. Now, this is a very, very, very unique and very precarious situation in terms of let's say this, let's call it friendship with benefits, temporary benefits, because at the same time, China understands what's at stake here. Because people see Russia sees Ukraine, China sees Taiwan. Russia does not want to indebt itself at such a level to China, and I'm not even talking about financial indebtedness. It does not want to indebt itself and commit itself in ways that it after cannot undo. Putin is a strong man. He's not okay with being subservient. He's not okay with being the number two. He wants to be the alpha. He wants to be the number one. And I take it back to the way that we perceive Putin specifically, and his regime and the Kremlin currently. I'm afraid we put too much emphasis on what the economic interests of Russia may be. No, it was not in Russia's economic interest to go to war. No one can possibly at this point in time argue that. And a lot of people that come from that standpoint in Europe were saying, no, but he's going to destroy the Russian economy and like it will completely suffocate the country. And yet here we are. Time and time again, he has shown us that he's not an economic leader. This is not a European Union country. He is a geopolitical leader. At this point in time, we cannot put anything out of the table in terms of we cannot underestimate that person in any way. We must take the things that he says seriously because he's shown us that he is willing to live up to the threats that he calls out. But I also want to echo, because war may have more advanced technology, but in its essence, it remains and has remained the same for a very long time. Now, I remember reading the book of Julius Caesar, Conquests on Gaul, and he said, never leave no opening of retreat to an army that you're about to crush, because you don't know how essentially a pack of wolves with their backs against the wall and nothing to lose will react. And to that extent, I agree with some voices that even if it's not pleasant, there needs to be some sort of communication, because diplomacy must prevail, no?
I'm definitely hoping for that too.
I would like just to have an hint on that.
Go for it.
For the majority, I agree with you, Nikos, especially when you say that Putin is not a economic leader, it's a geopolitical one. And on that, I would like to say energy is actually a geopolitical weapon.
Of course.
And on that regard, I understand that he tries actually to strike fear into the hearts of the people that oppose him, especially us. But the thing is, for the common European, I do believe for the common people, I do believe that energy will actually be the issue because it's affecting its life. More than actually think, I don't know if people actually lose their time knowing or fearing nuclear attack, although there is a possibility on that. But they actually know that when their salary comes, they are having less and less money to spend.
But we're
because of the energy costs.
Exactly.
And how it implies their way of life.
Exactly, because it's the blatant...
So for me at least, energy is the issue and the weapon. But yes, please.
We are seeing outright the pure and blatant instrumentalization and weaponization of energy by an individual that wants to strike fear. Because what you just said, Putin knows that, and Putin understands that. And also we have elections coming up, a lot of elections in a lot of places, and Putin also understands that. This is the same sort of instrumentalization as we saw, for instance, by some other countries, such as Turkey, when it comes to the migration.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose on that note, and I don't want to dwell on Ukraine the whole time, even though I think we should, I want to wrap this up by going a quick question around the table and kind of ask, given what we know about Putin, given what we know with the weaponization of energy, given all the other things surrounding this, look at the pipeline incident. How would you respond as the European Union? What would you be doing in the days and weeks to come after, let's say, Russia attacked a pipeline, threatening our energy supply? And I think quickly if we go around, and I know this is not an easy question, but...
I mean, no, please go ahead. Please.
No, I do believe like the Nord Stream was already shut down.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't working, and we knew like for a long time that something could happen, and during winter we would not have the gas supplies working. So we are just working for a long time, at least as the European Commission and also the member states. I would like to enforce on that. To actually find not only alternatives, but to actually find ways to cope with the situation. So, of course, this is an event like this is a sabotage event, but on the way, you know, it will in the grand scheme of things, it won't make actually any difference.
But I mean, here we're butting heads again on energy, but yes, sure, our reserves are actually pretty healthy at the moment. We're doing well on that front.
I just want to add, as of yesterday, 88.2% energy storage with daily increment of 0.022%.
Just remarkable. But going to your point earlier, it's fair it's striking to ours. It's an attack on a vital piece of infrastructure. Those images or those few pictures going on Twitter of just a bubbling gas spewing, that's what's going to be remembered by people, not the actual cold. Julien, you had a point beforehand.
Yes, I mean, I don't think that this potential sabotage attack really changed the calculation, aside from giving us something that's more useful for spreading the message to our fellow citizens. Basically, the goal needs to be keep supporting Ukraine, keep giving them heavy weaponry, give them the munitions they need for their HIMARS and ATACMS and all the equipment they need. And on top of that, just make sure to keep them in our minds. I mean, I had a friend who told me this recently, that a lot of my social media, from their point of view, has just been encouraging people to engage more in Ukraine. And we did the same thing during the election campaigns in France as well. Like, yeah, things are tough at home in France, but we still need to actually be engaging aggressively in supporting Ukrainians. And I think that is the goal now, especially as it gets cold, especially as things get problematic. We need to keep funding and supporting them through this war, because firstly, we'd want them to do that for us. But on top of that, we have a duty to keep the message live while people are starting to get distracted and saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing this because my energy costs went up by 200% in some cases.
And that's where we should actually act, is actually on finding real solutions, either they are short term or medium term, to actually overcome the situation.
Yeah.
So
and I just want to say that we will. I have no doubt that we will come to some sort of agreement. There have already been an announcement of measures yesterday, announcement of the eighth proposal of the eighth sanctions package by the Commission. We cannot, Simon, pretend to be something we're not here. And I think that's exactly why you invited us here, because you wanted us to give you our opinion based on the standing and the experiences and the perspective that we have. I don't doubt at all the competence of the people governing us, at least maybe not 100% of them, but like the overwhelming majority of the people governing us, I believe at the highest level, are competent. And I speak at least for the organization, for the European Commission. At the same time, we can't rush to conclusions. We cannot rush to conclusions. We don't know. Maybe this was an accident. Maybe this was an act of sabotage. And us talking about it just feeds into the narrative of the people that right now, unfortunately, are our enemies, because I think no one amongst us wants war, but unfortunately we are in a setting, Europe is at war. Perhaps we forget that, but we are right now a continent at war. Our economy is at war. Maybe we don't have soldiers fighting beside Ukraine, but Ukraine, in my opinion, is fighting not just for Ukraine, but for really all the democratic worlds. We really need to wait and see what is going to happen. At the same time, we need to take measures to protect our most critical infrastructure, because this just showed the degree of vulnerability, and that is no doubt due to the fact that that some of this infrastructure is extremely difficult to defend. But we need to increase our security here, and at the same time, also one aspect that unfortunately no one is talking about is the environmental. We need to do everything we can to stop these leaks and make sure that the damage to the environment is minimized, because in this war and in this energy crisis, in the short term, I understand that our priorities have changed, but in our medium to long term, we must understand that our priority should be one, the green transition, because our problems would be solved if, in terms of the energy crisis, to be clear, if we had dealt with these dependencies, problematic dependencies, long time ago. Unfortunately, people did not want to bear the cost and the political decisions, and yet we are here now. Repower EU is a very big chunk of this, and so should be the recovery and resilience plans. And there are dozens of EU-level instruments and funds and tools for us to use and employ as countries. But at the same time, there needs to be national responsibility. There needs to be national responsibility, and I'm afraid that in a lot of countries, people don't want to take responsibility, and either there is a blame shifting between the previous governments, the politics in Brussels, or like the opposition. There's always someone to blame, and but there must always be the impetus and the motive to take action, because if not now, when? If not us, who?
Yeah. And I think this is a good place to leave off the Ukraine subject, which we dwelled on a bit longer than anticipated, but I think it's, worthy to dwell on that subject and move on to a lighter topic, the recent election of a self-proclaimed neo-fascist in Europe. How are we feeling about the Italian elections, if that's not too big of an about turn here?
I'm showing a lot of solidarity to my Italian friends in general, but I think that I don't think it's as severe as many people think, quite honestly. I think that it's we are currently looking at the most right-wing government that we have seen, arguably, according to some, since World War II in Italy. But I think that the constraints of the European system, as well as the fact that a lot of the votes for Meloni will have been some protest votes, and not everything went for Fratelli d'Italia. A lot of it was also for her coalition partners. I think I would even focus more on one of the hopeful results of this, which was that the pro-European Azione Viva coalition came out of nowhere and won 8% of the vote, which was a very good result for a pro-European party that was distinctly pro-European in an incredibly hostile election environment that targeted the European Union as an overbearing nanny, which needed to get off Italy's back and allow Italy to find its future.
Interesting. And I know Italy is not all of our, prime areas of focus, but are we concerned about this right-wing trend sweeping across Europe? Do you think this will impede European collaboration, especially as rumors of a Mussolini being elected to European Parliament are running rampant?
I think that's a little bit far-fetched.
I'm glad you do, just to comfort us all.
First of all, let's be honest with each other a little bit. Whether we agree or not with a particular political party and, in effect, with a particular government, does not mean that it does not have a mandate.
Yes.
Now, Meloni's party won at all demographics. Clear mandate, especially for the context of Italian politics, which is extremely difficult for a single party to gain a massive lead over its competitors. We must differentiate between the election period and then when it comes time to govern. And I think insofar, every government with an extremely strong mandate deserves the benefit of the doubt, if you may, because they were elected. This is what people chose. Now, I have a graph here that unfortunately is just on my phone, but I will share it with you after, and maybe you can show it on the screen right now. So, massive chunk of 5-star voters that voted in the previous elections abstained. Now, the turnout in Italian elections much lower than before. That is already one cause for concern, because we have a democratic, not just a democratic right, we have a democratic privilege. So we must always exercise it. And irrespective of what people vote,
Yeah.
I believe that they must always go out and vote because it is their right, because people have died to defend that right, and people are in Ukraine dying to defend theirs. At the same time, the center left remained the same. Meloni's party seized more than half of the votes of Lega, and this will be very, very important when you start considering the dynamics of the coalition, because we have seen dynamic, strong coalitions in Italy over the past few years. Whether they've been able to make it work is a totally different story. And even though Meloni, to an extent, kept quite quiet during the election period, it remains to be seen because as her junior coalition partners, she has Salvini and Berlusconi. These are two individuals that do not like being junior in anything, I remind you. So we also have to see what the dynamics are going to be in the coalition. And again, I think Italy being the third largest economy in Europe and being an extremely, extremely vital, foundational part of the European Union and Europe, such a historic country, I think people understand, and politicians as well, that you can't go at it alone.
Yeah.
On issues like migration, on issues such as energy, even the recovery and resilience plan, I remind you that the biggest plan with around 200 billion is dedicated to Italy. Everyone must do their part to ensure that these funds, these historic steps that we took, are implemented. And I think there is enough maturity and there is understanding and leadership and competence to see these things. Now, whether or not they materialize, I'm no guru. I cannot say. But at the same time, we need to see how things go. But I think what you said in the beginning is a little bit far-fetched.
I didn't make the news bites.
I get that.
But I tend to agree with Nikos. Actually, first we should not forget that Meloni actually was part of the youth neo-fascist movement. So I believe that this kind of resonates in people's head, at least on media, and actually makes it a little bit of a turmoil. That's why I try to understand and go to the source, actually, what their platform advocates for. And to be honest, I didn't found it very, very far away from what is usually practiced all over Europe for right-wing countries, right-wing parties. Like, for instance, economically, they are pretty much conservative-wise, like the low tax burdens for companies, cut on deficits, of course, cut on welfare policies, and also they are pretty much keen on structural reforms. So they are pretty much in line with what the European Union wants, especially under the reforms, of course, because, as you mentioned, there is the historical 200 billion money from the RRF to be used. Again, okay, they are a little bit of Eurosceptic, that's true, but they never advocate to leave the European Union, nor the Euro.
It's true.
So they have this point. Also, they have a more nationalist approach to the economy, of course, like they are against globalization, but nowadays it's kind of a trend, not even for the right wings, but also for the left wings to be against, or some part of the left to be against globalization. She wants to spend more money in supporting Italian businesses. Okay, let's see how this will square with the internal market rules. And she wants to ban foreign buyings of Italian companies, which is also a little bit far-fetched, but let's see how it plays out. And perhaps their most controversial topic should be the social part of it, which is they are against the LGBT lobby and the ideology of gender, but nonetheless they have already said that they are going to keep same-sex marriage, the civil one, and also they are not going to touch in the existing abortion laws. So,
and also
okay, there is a little. Just allow me just to terminate to end on this. And perhaps the most controversial policy that they have is actually relating to immigration. Mm-hmm. But on that we can in a way, I understand, because Italy has been a forefront and in some way abandoned in terms of immigration policy all over the European Union. And by this, they actually want to propose a naval blockade to parts of North Africa. So it's a little bit far-fetched measure, but this is like, in overall, it doesn't seem that that extremist or how they want to portray it. But yeah, Nikos, please.
Portuguese are always optimists in the EU.
Yeah, we try. That's true.
The one thing that you said there about the fact that they've said that they're going to protect all these social rights in general, I see where you're coming from at that point, and I know lots of people have been saying this to me as well in general, but I'm concerned about whether that was not just political messaging just to get them through the election. Like, you know, Meloni saying, yeah, we're not going to touch abortion, we're not going to touch anything. You know, I'm a woman, I don't want to touch abortion, despite the fact that she believes it's a negative. And we should also remember that the current president of the European Parliament, Metsola, was also against abortion for a long period of time. And here she is doing a relatively good job of defending it as a European right, especially in light of what happened in the US. But I'm almost concerned that because of the fact that they're creating this new grouping that's, in my opinion, going to replace the ECR starting in 2024 when the elections swing by, whether or not there's not the beginnings of the Orban playbook where there's lots of, you know, we're not going to touch all this kind of stuff, we're not going to stop all this stuff, but we are going to, you know, we'll go for a referendum and we'll let this messaging go through the public, and then these people can, you know, decide what happens. And then Orban, for example, holds a public consultation. It says, we don't like this because X, Y, Z. Then Orban goes to the council or whatever and says, my people said they don't like this, we're getting rid of it. And it's this kind of thing that I'm worried that Meloni may start taking leaves out of, or pages out of Orban's book in order to circumvent her own statements recently, which I think is the bigger risk rather than an outright going, never mind abortion, you will have to have children.
Yeah.
To this, and also to touch a little bit, because you said it yourself, and one of the topics of discussion here is Hungary and the rule of law. Being part of the family of countries, which is the European Union, there are some values and rules that we all need to abide by.
Do we?
Sorry?
But do we? Does everybody?
Yeah, we do. We do. I think we...
Oh.
I stick
do.
by you on this. I will just say I've got to split the table here.
Like, there is the European acquis. There is the Treaty of the EU, the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU. There's all the secondary case law produced over years and years and decades of cases at the Court of Justice of the European Union. There are some rights which I believe are fundamental in this day and age, and those rights need, and I believe will be protected, and I consider abortion to be one of them.
Yes, but if it was the case that everybody in the EU stood by the acquis and European rights and values, then why has the Commission been trying to trigger Article 7 in various ways against member states who have not been following these and who have been protected by other states not doing so?
Well, I guess we will find out, because there have been some developments. I oftentimes ask myself that as an EU citizen, just like as someone that liked to read a lot of news and to be basically a news junkie and an EU nerd. I don't think anymore we as Europeans are at the level where we tolerate, let's just say, bullies. Especially now at the face of a bully, which is trying to outright bully another country into submission, because we must always stand up, and I'm not talking about anyone specifically here, but we must always stand up to these bullies and for the values and the rights that we believe are ours, and we deserve them. Because again, I remind you that when you choose to be a member of this family of nations, you choose some. There is a trade-off there is a relationship that you develop, not just, for instance, between Brussels and capital city, like with the other nations as well. You develop long-lasting friendships, diplomacy, and so on and so forth. You cannot just play by your own rule book. Whether some people want to play by their own rule book, that's a different story. Whether they will succeed in the long run, that's also a different story. To answer your question, the Commission is taking steps, proposing to the Council on particular infringements in Hungary. At the same time, let us not forget that there are some limitations of the EU's power, not because, let's say, the Commission or the Parliament would not want it, but because sometimes the member states would like to keep some of the be they competencies, be they decisions, to themselves. So it's people really need to consider who isn't or is doing something.
But we have to consider who is and who isn't doing things when we claim that everybody plays by the European rulebook, which is not the case.
No. I didn't say everybody plays by the European rulebook. I said there is a European
and you said that we all play by
that we need to play by. And of course, when there are infringements, we take decisions to overcome them. When we can. Which is why a lot of people with the COFOA platform wanted to get rid of unanimity, because this is what's been stopping Article 7 for 6-7 years now, with the let's say the right/far right alliance between Orbán and the governing bodies in Poland. Because again, everybody does make the trade-off when they join the EU to have this we have to work together, we have to come together and change our things. But the governments that are running around now aren't necessarily the same ones that push their countries and led their countries into the EU. No doubt.
And that leads to issues in the Council.
Being a bully always leads to isolation.
Not always.
I mean, I'm hoping that the Commission will pull through, and especially, I was going to touch on this, but I think we did it to a sufficient extent already with the proposed cuts to the EU money flowing into Hungary. So hopefully the bullies will get a bit of poking into them. I think this wraps up a bit of the main themes I want to talk about, but I mean, going around the table really quick, did we miss anything? Is there any themes we should have talked about? And I know there's one which might be absent to our British friends from this conversation here, but
we can overlook that.
As a former resident in a British colony.
If we are talking,
that might be a bit sensitive here. Sorry.
No.
You just opened Pandora's box.
The State of the Union. Is that what we're talking about?
No, I think that the UK. No.
Yeah, the death of a certain monarch, the extension of a new prime minister in that area.
I actually have another topic that
Go for it.
I would prefer I talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome
for making it easy.
I understood that we needed an intervention. Actually, I want to talk about an issue that oftentimes is overlooked, especially in circles in Brussels, and I'm more talking socially as opposed to politically. Turkey. Turkey every single day makes threats, but not just latent threats. Makes clear connections to genocide, to systematic killing of 2 EU member states, Greece and Cyprus, but also, of course, they are pretty much in conflict with Syria. There is the constant tensions with the Kurds inside Turkey, and I think as Europeans we are simply not talking about it enough. We are not talking about it because at some points in time it was convenient to make certain agreements because it suited us, but right now I think that we really need to talk about this, especially in the face of what's happening in Russia. I understand fully I'm not taking a blind nationalistic position here. Turkey is a very important international partner and country, no less, because it was extremely important, for instance, for the grain deal with Ukraine and with the UN and mediating, and in the Black Sea as well. At the same time, that does not alleviate the responsibilities and obligations that it has internationally. I've heard a lot of analysts, quote unquote, say that the elections are coming up in 2023, so he needs to rile up his nationalistic base and so on and so forth. Let me ask you something, and to the viewers, what happens after the elections? Does all of a sudden he turn into a little sunflower and he starts spreading love and freedom? Unfortunately, when you ask for blood, people will want blood.
Are there any thoughts on this around the table? Because I didn't have this in my
always,
notes.
it's always interesting topic for discussion, and it blends a little bit with the State of the Union speech, especially when von der Leyen speaks about the need for us to restructure our foreign policy and rethink our foreign policy, especially working, of course, with like-minded countries, but also looking to our neighborhood. Of course, on our southern neighborhood, there is always Turkey with the problems that you mentioned. I would just like to launch this into the discussion, which is the price of food and goods, especially the cereal ones, and the potential impact that that can have in the outer world or in the many regions of the world. Because, for instance, just for people to get a notion on that, many African countries, and not only African countries, are dependent from 50% to 100% of the grain that is exported either from Russia or from Ukraine, and also in other parts of the world. And if to this energy crisis, economic recession, we join this food problem, this will spike hard, especially on the poorest regions, which will actually place a further burden in terms of migration into Europe. And there, again, we have Turkey as a gatekeeper. And we have, so they are already, I think when the President von der Leyen is telling about the importance of dealing with our neighborhood, she's actually mentioning about this point. And it's also interesting that, again, linking to the Italian elections, that seemingly absurd proposal for a blockade to North Africa, it actually comes again to play into those things, that security that needs to be enforced. But thank you for bringing the topic on Turkey, just food for thought.
And as someone who worked on Brexit for 5 years, thank you so much for getting us away from the UK, because I've had enough.
If you want, we can talk about
No. So what are we going to say? Oh, look, they made another mistake and their economy collapsed. But
I was going to say in the death of arguably one of the biggest deaths in our lifetime.
Yes, but
that's still a lighter subject. But I'll leave you go on your Turkey point. Go.
But on the point of Turkey, I think what you're saying and what both of you are saying actually comes to a central point that I'm not here in an official capacity, of course. Please don't tell Emmanuel Macron I'm speaking in his name. But it comes to a point that we've been making as a party at the European and national level, which is that we need to have a strategically autonomous European Union. And on top of this, and calling back to what Ursula von der Leyen said when she was nominated as Commission President, way back when we decided that the Spitzenkandidat was a terrible idea and we should never do it again, was that we need to have a geopolitical European Union and we need to have a geopolitical Commission. And this plays into the way that we deal with things like Turkey, with food security, with how we interact with not just our neighborhood, but the wider global neighborhood and ecosystem that we're a part of. And the fact that we, as geopolitical actors, utilizing whatever tools you want, we have an obligation, at least in my view, in a very typically French liberal sense of the word, that we have an obligation to the world around us to give them the support that they need and to support a direction of travel for the world that is beneficial for everyone. Avoiding food crises in Africa by trying to do everything we can to negotiate in Ukraine and Russia, or working through partners like Erdogan, even if it gives them more leverage, to get more grain out of these regions. to support Ukrainians in their fight for freedoms and their very democratic, very pro-European view, supporting a lot of the countries that now are currently staring down a famine over the next couple of months because they simply don't have access to grains or materials that we have. And a lot of this comes through to what was mentioned in the State of the European Union speech, which we discussed on a podcast a few weeks back, is that we have to engage in this transformation of our society in a way that it reinforces our position and makes us safer and makes us more secure, but also gives us the maneuverability to actually engage with other states and support other states when they need the help from us. Not purely out of the goodness of our heart, even though I like to think, as Nikos does, that we are good people. And I think everybody is good people.
Say that, no.
I'm just teasing you, don't worry. But also because it's a useful tool against the rise of authoritarianism and far right or far left ideology, which tends to place us against one another and try to play us against one another, in effect weakening our societies, whether that's at a regional, a national, a European or a global level. And I think it's something that we need to keep in mind as practitioners in the European political sphere, that we need to support this move towards a more geopolitical European Union, whatever the form. I'm not going to argue. Let's do another podcast on federalism. That would be fun.
You are just planting the seeds.
Listen,
okay,
I need something to talk about.
Because
You know?
that was my follow-up. I would actually like to ask what is a geopolitical actor for you, or what type of geopolitical actor actually the European Union should be.
Well, I mean, it's...
But I mean, because
I
at this
think
point...
Nikos had the same question.
Yeah, no, but at this point, and you focus like, the strategic autonomy. In the industrial strategy, they say that it's a strategic autonomy, and also they want to promote like international trade.
Yeah.
So, which in some cases it can actually be like a regression or tentative of regression or decoupling from globalization. But on the other side, it seems like we want the best of both worlds. So where we stand,
This is, and I'll
so on the end of the geopolitical side, I mean, it's very difficult to compete for us. Remember, like our discussion in the NATO forum, it's very difficult for us to actually compete with actors that do not play by the same rule as us.
Yes, of course.
Especially when we do not speak on the same, we not have the same instruments, and we do not speak under one voice.
Yes, of course.
Imagine helping other countries when we try to impose them a political agenda or economical agenda.
Yeah.
Whereas we have other countries that do it not out of the good interest in their hearts, of course.
Yeah, of course.
But they do not demand from the others.
I know the examples you have in your head.
Julien.
Very quickly. I'm going to try to say this as quickly as possible, but I think we need to have another podcast just to like follow up on the...
I need to say something about geopolitics.
I'll let you go now.
I'm talking about China when I'm saying...
Yes, of course. But
just to clarify.
I think it's important to know. So on China, and even on Russia, when Russia's doing its little games in Africa, saying, look at how we're saving you from famine, blah, blah, blah. A lot of it is all conditional, which is a very big geopolitical tool. China, they don't seem to ask for anything. They're just like, yeah, we're going to invest in your infrastructure in Bulgaria or whatever. But what they do is if you actually look at the fine print, the interest rates that these countries, like North Macedonia is a big example with one of the highways going through there, the interest rate is, yes, Sri Lanka, in Africa, Montenegro. Yes, it was Montenegro, not North Macedonia. The interest rate is catastrophic. I mean, to the point that a lot of these countries had to even ask for EU support because they were going to go bankrupt at a national level, and the national banks couldn't actually pay to China, which is a problem.
But the thing is, yes, it is a problem. But the thing is, China is gaining leverage there.
Yeah.
Either if it is on Africa or on other parts of Asia or even inside of Europe.
Yes, of
Whereas
course.
Europe cannot make actually a stronghold on those countries.
But see, we're moving in that direction, and this is why, personally, I think it's a shame that we have the roadblocks we have at the European level, and I think we're all going to agree on this, in that because of unanimity, and it's untypically for a French person, I'm actually against unanimity as a tool. I think it's actually blocking us from making moves in this direction, because if you have a country like Hungary who can say, yeah, but I benefit from close ties with Huawei, or I can benefit from close ties with Russia, I'm going to kill this, that you guys can't stop me from getting more money from the other guys. We end up with a problem where we can't actually do this. But even then, we have to remember, and I'm going to dust off my European politics textbook now, the European Union is an economic superpower, and one of our main geopolitical tools is market power.
Yeah.
And we leverage...
The military dwarf.
Yes, that too, but let's not talk about
We
this.
shouldn't speak about those
wait.
things.
Go
I'll
ahead,
be
Nikos.
very,
You
very
get the last
quick.
point here.
Very, very quick.
Yeah.
So, to be proper Brusselians, it's not strategic autonomy, it's open strategic autonomy. We
Oh,
work
come
on this
on.
Thank
together.
Thank you.
Okay, I start off with the joke.
Thank you.
All right.
Paperology,
President von der Leyen did say that this is going to be a geopolitical commission. I have to say, a lot of people laughed. A lot of people did not take this
Yes.
claim seriously. 3 years on, 3.5, 3 and something, whatever. How much have we developed? The EU is providing lethal and non-lethal support as EU, not as member states, to Ukraine. We have the Recovery and Resilience facility, the European Critical Raw Materials Act, one of the key initiatives in the State of the Union address for this year, update of the EU Maritime Security Strategy, update the human rights sanctions regimes, a lot of things both in the pipeline and soon to be in the pipeline. We should not be arrogant pretending that we know what's best for everyone. We should know at least what we want. And I agree with you, certainly, but I no longer accept as an argument that the EU is not doing anything. No. If you say that, I have to say that you're not well prepared, because the strides, the steps we've made forward are incredible these past years, and especially these past 6 months. And I hope that, and I will continue working towards this as a European citizen, just that we make more and more steps, because I think that the current system, as it is there needs to be some sort of changes. At what direction, I'm not the person that's going to decide, but as the President herself said in the State of the Union address, we need some sort of discussion amongst ourselves and all the stakeholders, up and down and horizontally, to see where we can go from here. One of the suggestions you said, getting rid of unanimity. Again, I'm not the person that's going to decide, but I know for one thing that right now, as we are, we need to change some things towards to allow us, to enable us, and to unleash ourselves to be the best version of the European Union that we can. Again, the people will, the stakeholders and the people involved will decide, but the geopolitical union is very much, I think, in its nascent stages, and we need to keep pushing for it, because I think the next front of European integration is defense.
For sure.
We don't want to open that bucket right now.
Not yet.
Because we're running out of time rapidly here. Joao, you have the last word.
About this, Nikos, is that before we're trying to push for huge changes on top level, I think the European Union could actually see to what he's proposing. And for instance, this strategic autonomy things and the policy behind it, I mean, what do we actually want to achieve from this? Whereas we want to actually maintain this globalization standard. So it's difficult to actually want to please, for instance, the electorate and decoupling from the globalization, try to bring the supply chains here and having more control of it. Whereas on the other hand, we still are basically fomenting business outside, So, and on the other way around, on simple matters, for instance, lithium was considered a critical raw material and it's important for sustainable mobility, to foster the batteries. It's a strategic thing for us. But nonetheless, a few weeks ago, the European Parliament was still discussing if we are going to ban or not lithium or consider it as a toxic element. So what I'm trying to tell here is the European Union should, before making big changes, should try to understand what it stands, try to draft priorities and make it right and go further and search for the goal. Yeah,
and I think on that note, we're wrapping up our substantive discussion here, because we've trailed on a little. Part one. I should have just based this all around a geopolitical Europe, and we've gotten really riled up here. But for next time.
Episode 2?
Part 2,
Part 2, yeah.
But just to round us out, if we're going to go around the table, what's one word you would use to describe September as a month for the EU? And this should not be the hardest question in the podcast.
Engaged.
Engaged, okay.
And I would say that we're testing the level of engagement that the EU has right now in Ukraine in several other domains, but we're also seeing the results of this engagement
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to defense matters, where the materials. No,
We're going to discuss
listen,
this.
give me just this one point. We started seeing the equipment promised to Ukraine being delivered en masse in July and August and the beginning of September. And when it was in place, when HIMARS were in place in particular, and Ukraine was able to use them properly, that engagement paid off with the routing of Russian forces in Kharkiv and the crashing and burning of a lot of their ability in Kherson. And this is something that I think engagement is my word of the month, personally.
Okay.
But
I would say hectic. From
I
every
agree.
perspective.
Yeah.
No. From energy perspective, from the Ukrainian advances. Even from the changing tone in the speech of the President von der Leyen, and of course the Italian elections that got us like this, where we are now.
Caution.
Caution.
Caution. There are good things going for us. There are not so good things going for us. On the way forward, we need to exercise caution. There's not a lot of room for error right now on either side, on every side rather. There's no two sides right here, and we need to reflect deeply and ask ourselves some deeper questions in the long term. But right now, every decision needs to be scrutinized multiple times so that we know that it's the best decision at every level for everything we do, even as people. Like how many times you're going to put the dishwasher, or whether you're going to shower with warm water. So I think right now we need, going into the winter, caution.
Yeah, I think personally I would go role or something, because I think this month, looking back into history books, it'll be very constructive to the role of what Europeans see themselves at, what European policymakers see themselves at, and how it intersects in the world. Because even, I mean, going to the Hungary instance, we're actually taking stances, and that's something you want, that's something you think probably will never happen, but, or hope will.
no, it's something I hope it to happen.
Yeah,
but
You said one word, huh?
Yes, no, but I think it's just very promising that we are making strides in that sense. We are discovering a role in the world, and we are becoming maybe a geopolitical entity. But who knows?
That's a provocation for the next season, for the next show.
he's doing this on purpose at this point, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, talking of provocations for the next shows, I have to tell you a bit about the lineup coming up. So next week, I should be releasing an episode on food security and agriculture with an EU focus, tail ending very nicely off the point Joao brought up. And I might also be releasing that week an episode on Irish, 50 years of Ireland in the EU, and a bit of Irish perspectives on the EU. But those will be the podcast format. And then I don't know when we'll do another panel like this, but I've had a lot of great fun doing this. And I think it's been a very interesting discussion, especially towards the back end of this. So thank you all for being on.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having
Thank
us
you.
on.
Oh,
Thank you.
merci beaucoup.
Perfect. And I think we'll wrap that up here.
Hey.
Sounds good.
Give yourselves a round of applause.
Yeah.